Welcome to another geography lesson. Today we're going to continue looking at fluvial geomorphology. Now just to recap, just to revise what we did in the last lesson, to continue with this lesson, we're looking at our drainage basins. Now keep in mind, a river in a drainage basin starts from a source and eventually where it will flow into the ocean will be the mouth. Now in the last lesson we've learned other rivers joining the main river is known as tributaries. The high-lying area from between the tributaries is known as interfluves, and what separates one drainage basin from another drainage basin is known as a watershed. Now very importantly, these terms we need to be able to remember. And then we look at the different drainage patterns as well. Okay, remember this one? This is known as a dendritic pattern. It resembles the same, looks the same as a tree, the branches of a tree. And obviously, because it's uniformly rock underneath, the same amount of erosion and weathering taking place. Now today we're going to have a look at the three stages of a river. Now a river is divided up in an upper, middle and lower course. Just to give you an indication, and I'm going to quickly draw a longitudinal profile on the bottom of this page. A river can be divided into three courses. Now, you already discussed that a river originates from the source and it ends up where it flows into the ocean, to the mouth. Now, we can divide a river into three stages. Upper, middle and the lower stage or course. Now let's just quickly look at the characteristics of each of these stages. Now in the upper course, now as you can see that I've mentioned in the diagram I've drawn below, you can see it's very steep where the origins of the river is. Now the type of erosion that's taking place over there, if I can draw a transverse profile, we will usually experience downward erosion because the river is still very narrow in the upper course because of the very steep gradient. When we move to the middle course, the river starts to widen up, gets wider. Simple reason for it is because what happens in the middle course, other rivers starts joining this main river, tributary starts joining the main river. Keep in mind, the upper course is where the source is. It's usually just a river by itself. But in the middle course, other rivers, tributaries, starts joining this river. So that means the volume of water increases. So instead of downward erosion taking place, we also experience lateral erosion, making the riverbed much wider. Now, this causes the river to meander, but we will look at these characteristics a little bit later in this lesson. Now, if you look at the lower course is this area situated over there. Now, keep in mind, the gradient, as you can see, is not as steep as in the upper and the middle course. The volume of water has increased tremendously because lots of tributaries has joined this river. But now, because of the flat gradient, what happens? All that eroded material are getting deposited in the lower course. There's no erosion taking place, but only deposition, and floodplains develop as well. Now, basically, the load that's being carried from the upper to the middle course are being deposited in the lower course. The simple reason why is because of the flat gradient and because of the volume of water, and the riverbed will have the open shape. much wider than the upper and middle course. Floodplains are formed by the river eroding sideways, and the lower course, oxbow lakes, develops, that we will discuss in the next couple of slides. So if we can just recap, the river originates from its source to the mouth. The upper course, as you can see, is extremely steep. And the upper course, if you look at the river bed, it's a V-shaped because of the lateral downwards erosion taking place. And the middle course, the river bed is a bit wider. The reason why, because we experience downward erosion and we experience lateral erosion. And in the lower course, no erosion is taking place. Floodplains develop and the river starts to meander because of the volume of water and because of the gentle gradient. And the riverbed is an open U-shaped. Now, there's a synoptic view from a river profile. As you can see, this is the upper course, so we can just fill this in. This might be the source. We know it's extremely steep over here. The volume of water, there's not a lot of volume of water because it's the source of the river. As this river flowed downwards to the middle course, as you can see over here, look at what happens over here. The river widens. Why? Because the volume of water increases because of the tributaries joining this main river. So over here, only downwards erosion. As you can see, the river widens over there. We experience lateral erosion taking place. And as you can see in the lower course, a very flat gradient. The river is much wider over there. We're experiencing meandering. This process that you see over here, the shape that's taking place over here, is known as meandering. Oxbow lakes are formed, which we will discuss in the next couple of slides. And this is the mouth of the river. Now, once again, oblique view of the upper course. As you can see, extremely steep. You can see downwards erosion as the river cuts into the land over there. In the middle course, you can see the river starts to meander and the river widens up because of the volume of water. And as you can see in the lower course, only deposition taking place over there, which the river starts to meander because of the very flat gradient. Once again, steep V-shaped valleys, river beds, a narrow channel. Now, the characteristics of this area, the upper course, we will experience waterfalls because it's so steep. We'll experience gorges and very narrow valleys. Now, if we look at the middle course, the floodplain starts to develop. Now, what is the floodplain? The floodplain is this area situated right next to the river over there. Now, basically, all rivers consist of a floodplain, have a floodplain. What's the floodplain? During rainy season, what happens to the water level? We looked at it in the previous episode. The water level rises and the area next to the river will be flooded. It's a much wider channel, as you can see. And then the meandering of the river, this is the meandering of the river, which we will discuss in the next slide, starts to twist and bend with a cut-off and an undercut slope and a slip-off slope. And as you can see over there in the lower course, it's extremely wide, the riverbed, with an extensive area of a floodplain. And oxbow lakes formation takes place over there. Now, water can flow in two different ways in this river channel. Now, two things that you need to keep in mind over here is the friction of the riverbed and the steepness of the riverbed. Now, in this case, when the river flows and the velocity of the river is low, the water may be moving in thin lines. This is known as laminar flow. Now, when the velocity of the river increases, that means the speed at which the water is flowing, we're going to experience turbulent flow. Now, keep in mind, there's the amount of friction on the riverbed and it's the steepness of the gradient. The next slide gives you a beautiful diagram explaining laminar flow and turbulent flow. As you can see with laminar flow, the gradient is quite gentle. It's a friction-free surface, and as you can see, the water flows in sheets. Now, where do you think will we experience laminar flow? In the upper, middle, or lower course? Now, definitely not in the upper course, because the velocity of water is greater over there because of the steep gradient. The water rushes down, and there's downwards erosion taking place. In the middle course, where the gradient is getting a bit gentler, what happens? And it depends on the friction on the riverbed, what happens? We're experiencing laminar flow. And where deposition takes place, keep in mind the volume is greater at the lower course, but the velocity is not that great because it's slowing down because of the gentle gradient. We're experiencing laminar flow. Now, turbulent flow, it's very easy to identify it. Eddies is like the water is rolling over and lots of bubbles as the water moving quite fast downhill. And what can we say? It's usually downslope where it's a very steep gradient, and often because it's a rough riverbed, and it creates these eddies and bubbles on top of the water. Now imagine this, easy way to remember this, laminar flow, where does it take place? Think of someone skiing behind a boat. And if you think of turbulent flow, think of someone doing whitewater rafting. And it's going through all this white water where the water rolls over and you've got these bubbles all over the place and very fast moving water. So this is the two ways how the water moves from the source to the mouth. Laminar flow, turbulent flow. Think of laminar, a more relaxed flow, and the turbulent flow, more extreme and more faster flow of water. Now, we discussed in the middle and the lower course, the river starts to meander. It means it starts to twist and bends. Now, keep in mind, very important over here, grade 12s, it's not like we can steer the water. It's not like as the water continues to flow over here and we tell the water, okay, wait, let's move all the way to the left. Unfortunately, we can't steer the water. So what does the water do? It's going to start bashing into the outer bend of this river. And now, by now you should know, you've learned in grade 10 that water is an agent of erosion. So what's going to happen to this outer bend of the river? What do you think is going to take place? Erosion. And what's going to happen to the inner bend? All of the material that's been eroded over there are going to be deposited on the inside bend. And these two slopes we identify as the undercut slope, the steep slope, and the slip-off slope, where deposition takes place. Now, like I've mentioned, we can't steer the water. So these waters, as they get to the middle course and lower course, they start bashing into the sides of this river on the outer bend. That's known as the undercut slope. It's extremely steep because of the erosion taking place in this area over here. And then on the inside bend, all this eroded material are being deposited, creating a much gentle slope over there. Now, during this lower course of the river, we get different types of streams. Sometimes we experience straight streams because what happens over time, as the river flows and it erodes straight through this outer bends. And then the river doesn't need to flow all around this bend over here, but just follow a straight path, like straight streams that we experience. And then we have braided streams, but that's because of severe deposition taking place. Now think of hair that's being braided. Now, the hair is the actual streams of river. But in between, we got deposition taking place, small islands. It looks like small islands in the lower course of the river. The reason why is because of severe deposition. It's all the eroded materials from the upper course to the middle course being deposited in the lower course. And because of the volume of the water, the energy of the river has decreased, so deposition takes place and these small islands are being formed and the river starts to break. The streams start to cut through all these deposited materials. And then, like we discussed previously, we look at the river meandering in the lower course, twisting and turning. Now, obviously on the outside bends, we've discussed it. What's it? That's the undercut slope. And what's taking place? Erosion. And on the insides of the bends, over there, it's known as the slip-off slope, where we experience deposition, where that eroded material are being deposited. Now, we basically look at the river during its different stages. But a river from the side that I've drawn earlier to you is known as a river profile. Now, a longitudinal profile is this diagram that I've drawn earlier on the previous slides. From the source to the mouth. Now, we've discussed we can divide it up into 3 sections: the upper, middle, and lower. After the break, we will continue with the longitudinal profile of the river.